So, within the same vein as ego, or maybe a symptom of ego, would be a victimhood mindset or victim mentality. I would love to get your wisdom on victim mentality.
I'm thankful that my mom and my wrestling coach nipped that in the bud right away. That, like, we're not going to allow you to be a victim. And as a handicapped man, thank God I grew up being taught all those lessons of, like, take as much self responsibility as you can to fix as many things that are in your control as you can. And just
Mhm.
don't play victim. And that's what I see people do. They just go straight into the victim mentality. And, oh, because I was born in a wheelchair, this is how life is. And victim, 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 victim. They're not focusing on what they can do. And they're assuming a lot of things like aren't in their control when they actually are. So I guess you have to correct how they're viewing everything. You have to correct how they're saying things. You have to, like, have those talks with them. And as you catch them talking like a victim, you gotta address it when it comes up, like, right away.
Yeah, that's important. It is true that your tongue is your rudder, right?
Yeah. And just don't make assumptions. Don't assume what you can or can't do. Go find out. Because
Yeah, that's so good.
what's the assumption is a handicapped man? How the hell are you going to get your black belt in jiu-jitsu? How the hell are you going to go? You're going to go fight able-bodied opponents and win? Like, the assumption is, hell no, you're not going to, like, successfully do that. Well, I said, hey, give me a minute to think about it. I bet I could. I just got to think about how do I do that. So I see a lot of automatic assumptions. I'm like, that's an assumption. You didn't actually test the assumption. You probably can go a lot farther than you think you can. You don't know how far you could go. And when people just assume, they don't even try in the first place.
The Patined Podcast is about the earned wisdom bound in pain. It's about chasing failure, catching it, and using that as an opportunity. It's about scar tissue and sinew. It's about stretch marks and dented fenders and refusing to hide them. It's about pushing our insecurities and shame to the forefront instead of behind us. Instead of seeing rust as something that compromises a structure's integrity, we choose to see it as the grit that builds character. This is the Patina'd Podcast.
I want to ask you to intro yourself. Tell me about who you are and what Tyler Brey is about.
Yeah, so for those watching, I was born with Spina Bifida. I'm 35 years old. I got my black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu about 4 years ago. I've been a IFBB pro bodybuilder in the wheelchair division since 2018. I wrestled for a couple of years before that. I wrestled from middle school till my first year of college, and then that's when I kind of started falling in love with Jiu-Jitsu. I think that kind of took off from there. And yeah, one thing has kind of, like, led to the next, but sports has always been my thing. It's always guided me. I've always been really competitive. And then that's kind of led me into loving fitness. How do I get the body to respond the way I want it to? How do we use diet and exercise as medicine? How do we use it to facilitate, what we want from our bodies? Get it bigger, get it smaller, get it stronger, get it faster, get it healthier. How do we use diet and exercise to do that? So I've fallen in love with learning the science of that, and that's why I'm a personal trainer.
Awesome. And so you mentioned spina bifida, and I don't want this to be the focus of the episode necessarily, but I think it's obviously part of the original story as early as it can get for you, in terms of if there's an origin story of anybody, then being in the womb and creating an origin story in the womb is as early as one can get it. So in my brief understanding of spina bifida, there's something where the bottom of the spinal cord doesn't fully develop in the womb. Is that correct?
Yep. hmm
Okay.
And, like, linked to different things. I don't know if we, like, fully understand it, and I think there can be a couple of different linkages that cause it, and I think 3 or 4 different types. I've heard that I actually have the most severe type, but with the way I've grown up, it doesn't affect me significantly. I mean, yes,
Mm.
I'm in a wheelchair. Yes, I can't walk, but I was raised in a way that you figure it out. Whatever you want to do, figure it out.
Mm.
Like, for example, I've had gyms contact me and say, hey, I know you were recently working out in my gym. What could I do to make my gym more handicap accessible?
Mm.
Stuff like that. And it
Mhm.
always makes me laugh when people ask me that, because I don't walk into a place thinking, how can this place be more accessible for me? I walk into a place saying, okay, what do I have to work with? How do I make it work for my goal? I mean, I'm going to adapt to the place. I'm not going to ask the place to adapt to me, you know? So
Yes.
I don't know. I see myself through different eyes than other people see me in that way.
Mm. Yeah, I want to know more about how you got there and just kind of even the childhood and how you were raised that might have helped constitute this psychologically for you. But because
Yeah.
it's, that if we were to put into a nutshell the problem with the divisiveness and the problem with, how would I say it, the wussification of our country, or maybe just large countries, then it would be exactly the opposite of what you just said. It would be looking at the world through how can this more benefit me versus how can I rearrange myself towards it. It's more of how can this world rearrange itself towards me. I'm a unique individual. I'm a snowflake. I'm precious. You need to come and alter yourself around me, and you're looking at it in an opposite way. So, can you kind of tell me a little bit about that childhood and how your parents raised you? Because, again, my understanding with spina bifida is the majority of the heavy surgeries happen very early on, very early on, maybe in the first 2 years or first few years or something like that. So, have you been able to talk with your parents about that and what that time was like for them?
Yeah, to an extent, but like I don't remember any of the surgeries I've had that were actually handicap related. Any
Mm,
surgeries that I could tell you in detail about, it had nothing to do with my handicap. It was just
mm,
me being a rambunctious boy and I broke my leg one day or something. It was just
mm.
me being stupid, you know?
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, any like spina bifida related surgeries, they were so young. I don't remember them. I would have to ask my parents more like detailed questions about what that was like. But when it comes to like the psychology and stuff, I'd say my biggest influences was, for one, my mom, and then my wrestling coaches once I got a little older. But with my mom was always kind of, what do we have to work with? Let's strengthen that, kind of a thing. Let's not focus on what we don't have. Let's focus on what we do have and get stronger with it. So one of the examples that my mom will talk a lot about is when I was 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, when I was growing up, I would use my walker a lot instead of a wheelchair. That was something that my
Mm,
mom reinforced because she wanted me to, hey, like, we can use your legs to a degree, so let's get them strong to the best of our ability. So if it was a relatively short distance we had to walk, like we were just going into the grocery store to get a few things and then we're leaving, I'm going to use my walker for that because we're only in the store for 15 minutes. If it's a long walk, okay, let's use the wheelchair. So it depends on what the context was. But so we'd go into stores all the time when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. I'd playing with my toy in the grocery store. Every here and there, my mom would grab the toy. She'd maybe throw it 15 feet down the aisle and say, "Go get it." You know, that, right? She was
Yeah.
making me use my legs.
Yeah.
Right? She was
Yeah.
reinforcing, like, we're gonna work on what you do have. I probably don't even realize how much things like that my mom did, how much that really helped me not lose the strength in my legs that I have to this day. Because
Mm,
we work those muscles from an early age, and it gave my body a need to keep that muscle. Versus a lot of other handicapped kids, their parents kind of baby them and don't make them do anything, and then they lose those muscles that they could have had. That was a big influence on me, is like the way my mom's personality was. We're going to focus on what you do have, not on what you don't have, and we're going to strengthen what you do have. And then that led into, I started wrestling in middle school and high school, and especially my high school coach, he was really a tough guy. He was really like, everybody in the wrestling room, get on this level or get out. Like,
mm.
this is the level, like the worst guy in the room will be on this level. So like there was a demand in the room that you're going to be this much of a warrior mentally, or you're in the wrong room, get out. So there was no, I didn't get a free pass because I was in a wheelchair on that.
Mhm.
Set a standard and everybody met the standard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I can't help but to think how your mom was with that, that even helped set you up to be ready for that type of coach.
Yep.
Because if she hadn't been there, then that coach would have probably ate your lunch, right? Like there, you would have just completely dissolved and had this thing hanging over you probably for years of like what could have been, or sort of, I couldn't make it. Whatever sort of excuse you would have had for yourself. Um, and the world would have put a stamp of approval on that excuse too, by the way, right? But your mother wouldn't. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah. I would say like almost subconsciously, my mom taught me to look at every situation like, why can't I do that? Just give me a
Mm,
minute and think about it. I'll figure out how to do that. Maybe I can't do it the way that you do it, but I can find my own way of accomplishing that thing. So my mom
mhm.
kind of subconsciously taught me how to think about what do I do have. Now, how do I maximize that to get the things I want in life?
Yeah, it makes me think about too. So my wife and I, our second child is a high medical needs child. And that time early on, the first 3 years, especially surgery after surgery and all these types of things, like having been in that place, I could see why a parent would like really baby the child, or extremely protect the child and that sort of thing. Even as they age, like, he wrestles now and he's in jujitsu and he does all these things and he has some deficits because of certain things, but that's not a reason for him not to try and not attempt. But yeah, there is a natural sort of inkling in there as a parent to just say, nope, let's put white padded walls around them and just protect, let's wrap them up in bubble wrap and keep them as protected as possible. And to go against that instinct is extremely challenging as a parent. So yeah, kudos to your mom. And then how was your dad with all that? Was he kind of the same? What was the situation with your father?
I mean, so my biological dad, my parents separated pretty early in my life. Pretty much as long as I can remember, my parents were separated. So I would see my biological dad maybe like 3 times a year. He would come visit and we'd hang out for a weekend or something. But he lived a couple hours away. And
Hmm.
then I think I was maybe 7 years old when my mom met my stepdad, who's been in the picture like ever since. And
Okay.
so he was always there for every wrestling match and all that as well. He was actually the first person to, he saw how competitive and physical I was. So he's the one who actually suggested, hey, you should try out wrestling,
Mm.
because he wrestled a little bit when he was younger and he would see me wrestling with my friends in the living room all the time and just being as physical and competitive as I was. So he planted it in my head that, hey, why not go try wrestling? See if you like it, see if you can figure it out. And I did.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Good on him. Yeah. So, uh, do you feel like beyond the sort of natural, just aggression that a male child would have, right? Like any male child, like pretending to be whatever superhero they see on TV or whatever wrestle. When in my age, it was wrestling, like wrestle, Undertaker and that sort of
Yeah,
stuff, right? Like my age, it was yeah, it was
yeah, me
kind of
too.
those were the big okay, so those were the big sort of superheroes that you'd see on TV.
Yeah, I wanted to
I
be
was
like the
I
Rock.
Yeah, okay. So you wanted to be like The Rock. Yeah, I think, mine was a mix of, I don't remember if you there's one, was it, Val Venus? I had this, do
Yeah,
you remember him?
yeah,
I had this thing where I wanted to be like that guy. Probably tells you a little bit more about me, but, anyway, so yeah. So there's these figures that you'd watch. I wasn't too much I wasn't at all into comic books or anything, so I didn't have figures like that, but sports and pro wrestling, was my kind of my thing. But yeah, so when I so other than this kind of natural kind of competitive drive that would be in any male child, do you feel like not having a father pushed you in that direction into competition of wanting to be something better, wanting to prove yourself as a male figure in life?
I not that I ever felt, not that I ever like identified within myself. To me,
Okay.
I always enjoyed those more kind of masculine things. we grew up in the 90s. That was when Arnold was making all of his movies, and he was always the jacked guy who would beat up the bad guy and get the girl. So
Mm-hmm.
that was all we were watching in the 90s. And then I'm watching The Rock and Stone Cold, and like I always liked that more competitive masculine type of stuff. I never really felt like it was kind of proving myself or anything. I just liked it, and so then
Mm-hmm.
I did it.
Okay.
And that's kind of how it started. Was me and one of my best friends, we were always simulating WWF. We were jumping off tables onto each other and stuff.
So
We
were
were,
we. Yeah.
yeah, right. So we were doing that, right? We were
Yeah.
6, 7 years old. I remember jumping off the couch onto my friend and clotheslining him and all that stuff, right? And so my stepdad would see me doing that all the time at 10 years old. So he
Mm.
said, "Hey, why don't you actually go wrestle? Go sign up for the middle school wrestling team and see if you like it." Because you obviously are able to roughhouse like that in some way despite your disability. So why don't you go explore that avenue? You know?
Mm-hmm.
So I always had this kind of subconscious drawing to that stuff. I've always liked it.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I could say I was 6 or 7 when I was doing that. Like, unfortunately, this went up through high school. It's this pretend wrestling and jumping off of things. Me and my best friend, like actually, this is a picture of him right here behind me. Me, him, and 2 other guys, we'd get together and, like, put on these in his house, at his mom's house, like, we'd put up, like, a bunch of pads and blankets on the ground and, like, do these full-on moves with literally very little padding. It's, like, ridiculous. But, yeah, so, for us, unfortunately, this pretend stage of being a professional wrestler carried on maybe a little bit too long. But, yeah, that's, I could definitely resonate with that. So it started with you from kind of mimicking that stuff, and you said you went into jujitsu. So I know the story because I've done some research on you, but you want to tell the audience about how you transitioned from wrestling into kind of attaining a love for jujitsu.
Yeah, so that was my junior year. So I was already a couple of years into wrestling at that point, and my little brother was doing taekwondo at this gym down the street from my house, and they offered a multiple different types of martial arts. So I think my mom suggested, "Hey, why don't you go see if they have some kind of martial art you can do in the off season of wrestling that complements wrestling?" I was obsessed with wrestling at the time, so I always wanted to learn what's some way I can better myself for wrestling. So I went down there, and the guy suggested I try jujitsu and 2 or 3 other martial arts. And this was 2006. So I never heard of jujitsu back then. UFC
Hmm.
wasn't that popular back then, right? So it wasn't like a household word like it is today.
Hmm.
And so I tried jujitsu and 2 or 3 other martial arts. But jujitsu was really the thing that resonated with me because it was wrestling, but the illegal stuff, but it was the
Yeah.
same. It's grappling. It's just a different form of grappling. So I loved it because I mean it was wrestling, but taking the rules off of it.
How was the transition for you getting used to being on your back?
And it's I'd say it didn't take that long. It would just be weird for the first 2 or 3 weeks when I would switch from wrestling season to jujitsu, and then
Hmm.
jujitsu back to wrestling. I would have to do a mental switch, but after maybe 2 to 3 weeks, I would fully make that switch, and I wouldn't do them both at the same time. When I went into wrestling season, I would stop doing jujitsu, and so I never mixed them because that would be too much mentally.
Hmm.
But yeah, but they totally complemented each other. The culture of wrestling, the way the sport is set up, you can do it in middle school and high school, and then like college. If you're going to wrestle in college, you're an animal. Like there's
Hmm.
nobody wrestling in college that's a hobbyist. you know, you're a hundred
Hmm.
percent animal, or you don't do it. So wrestling kind of there's no hobbyists in wrestling. It kind of weeds them out, and you're
Hmm.
trying Olympic gold medalist animal, or why are you wrestling? So
Yeah.
that's just the way the sport's set up. Versus in jujitsu, you could totally be a hobbyist jujitsu person. You don't have to be ultra competitive. You can do whatever you want, and you can do jujitsu until you're 70, 80 years old and just have fun with it,
Hmm.
Or you can animal and be super competitive and try to be a world champion in jujitsu. But the culture of jujitsu has either avenue, versus in wrestling, it's not so much there for either avenue, hobbyist or serious competitor. So
Yeah.
once doing jujitsu, I'm like, hey, this is something I can do forever. Wrestling, I can't really do it forever.
Yeah, I think this is an all sports combined number, but I think it's like to go to the collegiate level, you have to be in the top 7% of
Hmm.
all high school athletes, right? And I would wager to bet that number shrinks even more from a wrestling perspective. Because
Hmm.
like you said, there is a certain mentality that goes in where it like you said, it weeds out the people that are there just to kind of get some exercise, just to try to get out some aggression or something. No, it kind of weeds them out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. In
mm,
wrestling, there's pressure. It's you're trying to be the best in the world, or at least the best in like the state, or why are you wrestling? You know, it
mhm.
is a lot more hardcore of a sport,
So you went from wrestling, started to gain a love for jujitsu and then powerlifting, correct?
And then I did powerlifting. I did that for a few years. Yeah, that was just something I kind of dabbled in. I had a friend who did it, and they said, "Hey, you'd be good at it." And I did that for maybe 4 years or so, and it was kind of a hobby. I didn't love it, but I was decently good at it. I got to go to the World Championships in 2010, which was in Malaysia. I got to go to. I was on the Pan Am team in 2011 in Guadalajara. I was trying to make that Paralympic team, which would have been in London, I think, but I didn't quite make that team. So I kind of just dipped my toe in the water with powerlifting. And after that Olympic cycle of 4 years, I didn't love it. And then I just said, okay, I'm going to only do jujitsu and dedicate more to that.
Mhm. Okay. And at what point did you get into was it, I think did you say it was somewhere around 2015 or so where you started getting into the bodybuilding thing?
Yeah, and then bodybuilding, I did my first show in 2015. So
Okay.
Nick Scott, he's the promoter of the wheelchair division. He's the guy who's really grown the whole thing and taking it from day one, where it's just a dream, to where it is today on the Olympia stage. So
Mhm.
he contacted me through, I think, Facebook in 2015, and he just saw my pictures and stuff. And hey, you're a competitive guy in a wheelchair. Looks like you lift a lot. Blah blah blah. You should try bodybuilding. So that was him getting the sport going. And so I did my first show in 2015. I was one placing away from winning my pro card that year. So I thought, hey,
Mhm.
like, I'm not terrible at this, you know? And
Yeah.
my buddy, his name's Jeremy Bundia. I don't know if you've heard of him. He
Mhm.
won the 4 times in men's physique. And he's an old high school buddy of mine. And he happens to be a Mr. Olympia winner, like multiple time Mr. Olympia winner. So he trained me for my first show. So that was really cool to be mentored by someone who really knows what they're doing. And to be that close for me to win my pro card, I thought, hey, like, I'm not bad at this. So over the next couple years, I started dedicating more to that. I won my pro card in 2018. And then that's when things really took off. And one thing led to the next. And then before I knew it, I was on the Olympia stage. Now it's just something I've been obsessed with for the last 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. And just to kind of newly jump into it like that, that's amazing. You, as a child, was there any feeling different or feeling
No.
like people are looking at you differently?
Yeah, I mean, that's always there. It's always there, totally knowing that you're different, totally knowing that I need to go about things differently. I need to figure things out differently. I need a little extra time to think about how to problem solve this particular issue, because I can't solve the issue the way that an able bodied person can. And then you could probably go into a wormhole of conversation about the world does view people in wheelchairs differently, and now and different people in wheelchairs handle that differently. Some
Mm,
people get really offended very easily, and they kind of get a chip on their shoulder because of it, and then some people handle it better than others. But that's
mm.
a real thing in the wheelchair world, I guess. And it's interesting to see across the board how different people in wheelchairs handle it differently. Some handle it better than others.
Yeah. I want to talk about ego with you. So, I'm interested in the virtues of humility and meekness. And as you stated with wrestling, that would seem to be a sport that can very much humble you. Also, jujitsu. And I can't imagine, I'm sure there are other sports out there, maybe rock climbing or something. But other than maybe like ultra running, I can't imagine two other sports that can really humble you and get you into your own mind and into your own body and really check in with yourself and see, okay, what am I actually made of here? So I want to get your input on ego and how you feel about it and that sort of thing.
You're not going to make it in wrestling or especially jujitsu if you have a big ego, because that 100-pound girl over there is going to kick your ass. you know, so like, Lindsay Boston, when she first started, yeah, I mean, she's not a hulking, monstrous female. She'll destroy you though. So yeah, like just you're not gonna make it very far if you have a big ego, because your ego is gonna get crushed day after day after day as that 100-pound person just destroys you. And you either gotta drop your ego, come back and say, okay, Lindsay Boston, who I am way bigger and way stronger than, how did you choke me out 10 times yesterday? How'd
Mm,
that happen? Please teach me. So you got to humble yourself and ask Lindsay to teach you all the way she destroyed you, or let your ego win and never come back.
mhm. Yeah. If you got a big ego, then maybe you're just very glad that the gym was offering a free first day of class so that you can know not to go back.
Yeah,
And you didn't have to spend any money.
we see plenty of those over our years. We see that person who shows up to one or two classes, and then the 100-pound girl who's been training for 7 years destroys him, and then he never comes back because he doesn't want to acknowledge what just happened to him.
Yeah, it just made me think about though, the argument to that would be, and I don't know this guy personally, someone like a Dylan Dennis, who comes off certainly as somebody that is all ego, and he is somebody of high caliber in the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or was at some point anyway, very, very high caliber, and who he was trained by and all of that. And he seems to like that actually seems to be the separation between him and his trainer was maybe his ego. So how does somebody like that slip through the cracks? I guess theoretically.
I don't know. Maybe I would say it's different types of ego, maybe would be the way to say it. Because he had to
Mhm.
humble his ego and get tapped out a million times to get as good as he is today. Like he had to lose a million times and then, okay, ask, why did I lose? Teach me. So in a way, he had to humble his ego to get to where he is. But then once he did that, he started winning more and seeing more success. And then his ego grew, So
Mm.
I don't know. I guess there's different levels of ego, or there's different styles of ego, different types of ego. And one type of ego he has mastery over. And then another part of his ego he doesn't have mastery over. I don't know. I think to a degree there's a putting your ego out there because it's part of your character you're playing to get eyeballs on you. And like, hey, if you hate me, then you're buying the pay-per-view to see me lose, and now I'm making money. So maybe some of the people, it's kind of a character to get eyeballs on them because eyeballs equals money.
Sure. Yeah, and there also should probably be a separation between like narcissism and confidence too. Like when you get to that level, like there's got to be like a high level of confidence that you're walking around with your chin up and your chest out and saying like I'm the baddest man in the room. There's got to be such a high level of confidence in that, and I don't think that necessarily has to blend into narcissism either. But yeah, like you said, it could be a character thing too. Yeah, interesting. All right. So tell me a little bit about this. The you said you've been a black belt for 5 years. Did you say 5 years?
4 or 5 years, something like
4 or 5
that.
years. Yeah. So tell me about that experience because I see, I'm big in a big fan of MMA, and I'll see guys in MMA who have been champions in the UFC get their black belt and just cave to their knees crying in gratitude, and something you didn't see them do in the ring when they won their UFC championship title. There's certain guys or champions in high level MMA organizations when they got their black belt, they just like they're a puddle of tears. So tell me about that experience of getting your black belt and how was that for you?
Yeah, because it's like when you're a professional fighter and you're in the UFC, every time you win a fight, it advances you in the ranking. There's only so many wins before you're the champion. You don't got to win 100 fights before you're the champion. You only got to win, what, maybe 4 or 5 at the most. I mean, if you keep on winning, you're going to move up the rankings pretty quick. It only extends your journey if you lose here and there. But so it's, I don't know what word to use. It's very like there's a set cadence to it. You know, when you're in the UFC and you're winning. With jujitsu, though, it's totally instructor's opinion. It's not a thing of, okay, once you win this many matches in class by armbar, then you are going to get your purple belt or whatever. It's not a set in stone thing. It's just your instructor watching you every day. And hey, I have a standard for you in my mind that isn't exactly quantifiable. I'm going to give you your black belt when I feel you're a black belt. And depending on what your relationship is with your instructor and how they view you, some instructors, they have a really high standard, you know? So they're like, I'm going to watch you every day and I'll give it to you when I feel we've got the best out of you, you know? And I'm an instructor today. Like I'm teaching at Aries Jiu-Jitsu in Roseville. And the way that I view it now as an instructor, I get to know each student and I'll get an idea of their capacity for greatness, like how great could they be. So that's what I judge them on. You know, I judge them on where do I feel their ceiling is. And if I feel their ceiling is up here, but they're only comfortable pushing themselves to here, like, well, I'm not giving you your belt until you push yourself to here. I'm going to require more out of you than you're comfortable giving because I know it's in there. I know you got more in you to give. So I guess a good instructor pushes the student to those levels that they're not comfortable going. And then when the student finally does that, they finally achieve that. The instructor acknowledges it by giving them their black belt that you've gone to that level I knew that you weren't comfortable going to, but I knew you had it in you. That's where you see the tears. Like, there was plenty of days that I wanted to quit and I didn't. There's plenty of days that I got humbled. I wanted to go home and cry and not come back, but I came back anyway and humbled myself and asked, okay, how did I lose yesterday? So I guess that's one of the main things that gets the tears going for a lot of people is the all the demons they had to kill on the way to black belt.
Yeah. And then what? Like you get the black belt and then there's not like I guess there's like degrees of black belt, right? But I don't, do they do ceremonies for the first degree, third degree, or second degree, third degree?
Yeah, well, when it comes to like giving stripes, we'll say you're a first degree and right. So that it's your instructor's opinion at all of the belts up until black belt. They give you first degree, your second degree, your third degree on your purple belts or whatever, but it's purely based off of their opinion. Once you get to black belt, it's based on your time at black belt. So it's no longer based on your instructor's opinion. I'll laugh with my students all the time and I'll tell them this, that you guys keep coming, putting in the work. You're going to get your black belt one day. And then the day you get your black belt, then you realize, oh, there's so many more levels to black belt. You realize you're the white belt of the black belts. Like you're the bad black belt. You are a black belt, but that doesn't mean you're a good black belt because there's really good black belts. There's assassin black belts out there and you're not half of what they are. You know?
Yeah. So it does kind of take away some of the steam then, because like you were saying, the emotional response to attaining the black belt is because you got the approval, essentially this pat on this back, this thing that says you are good enough here.
Yep.
And then after that, then it's time. So, you get the first degree or the second degree or whatever. You're like, okay, well, that's just because I've had my black belt for 8 years. It's not as emotionally impactful as getting that approval from somebody I wanted approval from.
Yes. Yeah. They set a standard on you and they set a standard that was uncomfortable for you to reach and you did it. And now they're acknowledging you and giving you that black belt. And yeah, I mean, it means a lot to me that I have a lot of respect for my instructor, Cassio Wernick, and that he saw me as a black belt. That means a lot to me that I reached his standard for me. That meant a lot to me, So that's goes along with like having a lot of respect for your instructor and his standards, right? But then once you get your black belt, it is just based on time now. Now it's just the fact that you kept going, you didn't stop. So it
Mhm.
doesn't exactly mean as much in that way. But then it's up to you. Like, okay, how good of a black belt do you want to be? You know,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
that's up to you. And by the time you get your black belt, I mean, did you get your black belt at 25 years old or 45 years old? It's not always realistic that you're going to be as good as Marcelo Garcia or Gordon Ryan if you got your
Hmm.
black belt at 47. It's like, well, okay,
Sure.
you're probably not
Yeah.
going to, you got it later in life. But that's just the way that your jujitsu story played out. There's nothing wrong with that.
Hmm.
Not all meant to be an Olympic gold medalist or whatever.
Yeah, but there's something so cool about a sports journey that's sustainable that you can do for years and years. So
Yeah.
that's really cool too. So within the same vein as ego, or maybe a symptom of ego, would be a victimhood mindset or victim mentality. I would love to get your wisdom on victim mentality and maybe where it comes from, because to you, maybe that's an obvious answer, but to others listening, it may not be. And then your general consensus of what victim mentality is, and then maybe if there's a cure for it, what would it be?
I'm not sure how to answer. Oh man, I don't know, but I mean, my brain is going to like, how did you grow up? And like, I'm thankful that my mom and my wrestling coach nipped that in the bud right away. That like, we're not going to allow you to be a victim. Nope, that's not allowed. you know. So I guess that's what's kept me from becoming a victim, like many other people in wheelchairs are. I've met them, where I can tell they really have that victim mentality, and I feel really fortunate that I wasn't allowed to have that victim mentality by my mom and by my wrestling coaches. So I mean, the younger you can address that in a person's life, the better.
Hmm. And for you as a trainer now, if you see this with a client that comes in with the victim mentality and they're an adult, how do you work toward that other than just like submitting them over and over and making them vomit with exhaustion? What's the what other tools do you think you're able to implement to help them with their victim
Correct.
mentality?
You have to correct how they're viewing everything. You have to correct how they're saying things. You have to correct how they're viewing
Mhm.
things. You have to like have those talks with them. And as you catch them talking like a victim, you gotta like, no, we're gonna rephrase that differently. You're viewing that wrong. Why is that true? Why are you viewing it like that? You gotta address it when it comes up, like right away.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
Case by case, but
Yeah, that's important. Like there are some situations where you fake it till you make it, and then you do that enough and you start to believe in an opposite direction. And then there's situations where that inauthenticity can bite you in the butt. But it is true that your tongue is your rudder, right? And the if you can speak in a negative sense or you can speak in a realistic sense. Like you can speak in a status of reality or at least neutrality and not be negative and not have this worldview of like, as we say in the recovery world, pour me, pour me, pour me another drink. There's this mentality toward, at like I said, at least being neutral, at the very worst being neutral with your comments. But I would replace neutral with reality or realistic. But yeah, yeah, I like that.
and yeah, and just don't. I feel like what I see a lot, maybe with like the wheelchair world, don't make assumptions. Don't assume what you can or can't do. Go find out. Because I
Yeah,
mean,
that's so good.
what's the assumption is a handicapped man. How the hell are you going to get your black belt in jujitsu? How the hell are you going to go? You're going to go fight able-bodied opponents and win? I'm like, the assumption is, hell no, you're not going to like successfully do that. Well, I said, hey, give me a minute to think about it. I bet I could. I just got to think about, how do I do that? How do
Mhm.
I take this able-bodied strategy that some black belt's going to teach me? How do I tweak that strategy in a way that only uses my arms and my head and my body, but it doesn't use my legs. Right. So I see a lot of automatic assumptions of I can't do that because I'm in a wheelchair or because I have whatever disability. I'm like, that's an assumption. You didn't actually test the assumption, you know,
It's so
actually
good.
figure it out, actually go find out.
Yeah, that's spot on, and that's not only for the wheelchair world. That's for the world.
Yep.
What you just said, right? Like there's these assumptions that we make towards things that we think that we can't do, and until we do them, even if we fail, right? Like for me, one of my mottos with my clients and myself in life is chasing failure or chase failure. Go out and seek it out. Go out and do it. Because either way you're gonna fail. Either you're gonna fail cowered on the ground in the fetal position being kicked by it, or you're gonna get up and chase it. And you still are likely to fail when you do it, but when you do so, there's something so pronounced. Like you can learn from these assumptions that you're talking about. You're like, "Yeah, I did fail, but man, I got so much further than I thought I could."
Yeah.
So if I tweak this and I do this and instead I try this or I prepare more by doing this, then there's a possibility. And once you get that idea of possibility rolling in your head, all of a sudden that victimhood, there's your cure, right?
You probably can go a lot farther than you think you can. Maybe you can't reach that ultimate goal that maybe I can't be an Olympic gold medalist, but could I be an Olympian? Maybe,
Mm,
you know? And it just
mm.
versus someone who's like, nah, I can't even do that wrestling thing. Like maybe you could actually be a pretty good wrestler, maybe not an Olympic gold medalist, but you don't know how far you could go. And when people just assume they don't even try in the first place, and you know,
Yeah, for sure. So going into the mental health side of things, I looked this up and my assumption was about as accurate as research has shown. This is just a good guess. It's not that I'm brilliant. So, people with spina bifida are 95% higher, more likely than people without to have depression, to have anxiety, to have suicide ideation and suicidal attempts and self harm behavior, nicotine dependence, as well as substance or mind altering substance dependency. 95%. The numbers are across the board 95%, 95%, 95%, which is interesting. So for you, how, like, have you had any history with any of these things, depression, anxiety, any of these things? And what are your thoughts toward all that I just jumbled out there?
I mean, that makes me immediately think, thank God I had my mom and my wrestling coach to, teach me like, do you have a problem? Figure it out. But like
Mm,
we're not going to do the victim thing. We're going to figure it out. Like another lesson that it was a wrestling lesson, but you carry it over into life. Something my wrestling coach was big on. If you're out there doing your wrestling match and let's say you get put on your back and the referee called the pin a little bit early, but you weren't
mm,
actually fully pinned and the ref just wanted to get out of there a little bit early and go get lunch, then you come stomping off the mat and you're like, I wasn't pinned. The referee called the pin early, blah, blah, blah. Our coach would always say, why were you on your back? You shouldn't have gotten put on your back. You screwed up and allowed
mm.
that to happen. You allowed the referee to call that match early. And if you wouldn't have screwed up and got put on your back, that wouldn't have happened. Take more personal accountability or personal responsibility, I mean, right?
Yeah.
So just that's what I grew up with. And as a handicapped man, thank God I grew up being taught all those lessons of like take as much self responsibility as you can to fix as many things that are in your control as you can and just
Hmm.
that don't play victim. And that's what I see people do. They just go straight into the victim mentality and oh, because I was born in a wheelchair, this is how life is, and victim, 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 victim. They're not focusing on what they can do, and they're assuming a lot of things like aren't in their control when they actually are. Just there's not enough taking self responsibility on like all the things that are within your control, fully maximize them, fully fix everything that you can, and your life will be a whole lot better.
I think that correlates into life where you can look at all these little instances. I got pulled over first time in 17 years. And I know it's been 17 years because I've been sober for 17 years. And last time I got pulled over was New Year's Eve of 2006. and I was on a lot of meth that night, but I wasn't drinking yet. And I got pulled over. Long story short, skip forward. And the other night, I'm taking my kids to a Kings game, my two older sons to a Kings game, and I get pulled over up here in Amador. And it's like the sun's going down, it's dark, and I see lights come behind me. I'm like, all right. The guy caught me coasting down maybe 5 miles over, but I wasn't going that fast. I was going down the hill. But so he pulled me over. He's like, do you know why I pulled you over? I'm like, I don't know. You caught me coasting. And he's like, no, no. He's like looking around my car. He goes, your windows are tinted on the front, on the sides. I'm like, no, they're not. I bought it like this. This is factory. Everything's factory. He's like, yeah, roll down your window. And so we have this back and forth a little bit, and I'm being respectful. I'm teaching. It's a good teaching moment for my kids who are in the back. Always respect authority. Always respect the police. So I'm talking to him with respect. He goes back and he runs my stuff. And while he's doing it, I'm looking, I'm like, the sun is down. There's no way this guy, impossible. There's no way this guy pulled me over because I have tinted windows. There's no way he saw it. No way. He pulled me over because whatever, he's looking for something. Maybe he thought I was an out of towner. Sometimes up here in Amador, they can do that. Small towns, they can do that. So whatever, he pulled me over for whatever reason. And then he gave me the reason when he found it. And I can be a victim and I can be like, dang it, like that's not fair. I'm fighting this. I'm not taking off the tint. No, I have, he showed me I have tinted windows. It's against the law. And is it petty? Yes. Is it ridiculous? Yes. But I'm not a victim in this. Like he caught me, right? And so that what you're talking about is that premise of taking account for your place in it. That's foundational for this victimhood stuff we're talking about. So yeah, exactly.
Like, here's the cards that I've been dealt. How do I win with them? Period.
Yeah.
Well, you weren't dealt a royal flush. Like, oh, well, here's the cards you have. How do I win with them? Move on to that part. How do I win with these cards?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So in bodybuilding, more than any other sport, there is this major mental health condition that I think more and more, because of other things going on in the world, this is being highlighted, this body dysmorphia, because part of the sport is picking yourself apart, the little tiny details, and trying to be perfect and trying to get this muscle perfect, trying to balance out the muscles, trying to get everything to be as perfect as possible to win the competition. So how has that been for you, body dysmorphia?
I would say that the portion of the bodybuilding world that has a unhealthy mentality, they're relating it to their self-esteem. There's narcissism. There's that whole thing that's very stereotypy of bodybuilders.
Mhm.
That self-obsessed and narcissistic. And then there's the other side of bodybuilding, which that's how I would say me and a handful of my friends that are bodybuilders that I hang out with, we look at it more like, here's my painting. I'm showing you my painting. I worked hard on my painting. Show me your painting. It makes me think about Dorian Yates. So he's a famous bodybuilder, and he said like his whole career, it felt like he was working outside of his body, working on himself like it was a sculpture. Like I can relate to that because like I don't. It's not something where we're tying it into our self-esteem and narcissism and I'm better than you because my biceps are bigger than yours or whatever. No, it's just we're working on a sculpture or a painting and it's an art show and then we're going to meet up at a competition to see who made a more awesome sculpture.
And so for you in particular, it doesn't carry over beyond like the show or something like that, because it seems like you would have to be somewhat obsessive to choose that as a sport in general, but I'm making an assumption here. If the obsessive component is related toward how you look in appearance and size and lean mass and all that, then it would seem like it could be that obsessive component can very easily then dip into or integrate with how you feel about yourself in general in relation to what you're seeing in front of you.
Yeah. And it very easily could. But yeah, actually, probably a great example is Dominic Cruz. You know who he is?
Yeah.
He did a fantastic interview with Joe Rogan because for those that don't know his story, he's a famous UFC champion, and then he's had an unbelievable amount of injuries. Where
Hmm.
like he got an initial injury, then he had a surgery, and then something went wrong with that, so he had to have another surgery, and it was just this like Murphy's law of surgeries that he's had to have,
Hmm.
where he was already a legendary champion, but there was years that were stolen from him by life where he could have won 5, 6, 7 more championship fights, but
Hmm.
we'll never know, because it didn't happen. He went on Joe Rogan's podcast and talked about his experience, and he said how going through that rough couple of years, he had to look at himself like being a UFC champion is not my identity. My life isn't
Hmm.
over because I'm no longer UFC champion, because this unprecedented turn of events where I keep getting injured has taken it from me. That has nothing to do with who I am as a person. That has nothing to do with my value. That has nothing to do with any of that. So here's this person who has put his life and his soul into trying to be the best in the world, which he was. And then when it was taken from him, he had to really distinctly think about, okay, this belt has been taken from me by life, but that has nothing to do with who I am as a person. It's not my self value or my identity or anything. So to me, like, it was such a example of a healthy mentality.
I remember when he had that transition because it was probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years deep into him being off the shelf, for like on and off the shelf, on and off. And yeah, his shoulder, his bicep, it was plantar fasciitis. It was like all this stuff. I could tell the difference. He had an interview with Ariel Helwani, and I had a similar response that you heard when you heard him say it on Joe Rogan, which I didn't hear that one, but I heard him say, like, give this really deep, insightful separation between this used to be my identity. This is like, actually, it got me to the levels that I got to, but having it taken away from me allowed me to actually learn who I am and like actually have an identity outside of the sport. And now to be able to transition, at the time he was just transitioning to a commentator. Now we know him. He's been doing commentating for years and he's really good at it. But he's like, I'm still fighting. I'm still an active fighter, but like that's not my identity anymore. And that belt isn't my identity anymore. And so there's a certain release with that.
Yeah, and then kind of like tying that back to bodybuilding, it's really easy to blur those lines. And hey, I look good because I'm getting ready for my show, so then I'm going to tie that into my identity and my self-worth and all that stuff. It's really easy to do that. But if you have a healthy mentality, you'll be very careful not to do that. The
Hmm.
same way that if you have a healthy mentality, Dominic Cruz can win that title again and not let it blur the lines between his identity and self value and winning the title again.
Yeah. And I think that's something, if anybody that sees this that has some variation of body dysmorphia, that would be identity is something that all of them could probably connect with and realize that, yep, they're floating their identity or they're connecting their identity with the image or with, that particular style of dysmorphia that they have. So recently there was a big death in your world and in the bodybuilding scene with somebody who was a friend of yours, Chad McCrary.
Mm.
And though we don't know yet as to the cause of death, it did make me think about the death rate in general for the bodybuilding world and powerlifting world too. Um, with young, powerful, superhuman individuals dying, having catastrophic heart conditions and things like that happen as a result. What's your sense of all that? And then is that something that you think twice about as being somebody that obviously has his eye on longevity? How does that play for you?
So, I mean, that's something that everybody has to do is, are you healthy in every sense of the word? Are you physically healthy when it comes to your body? Are you mentally, emotionally healthy when it comes to everything we were just talking about. That's where someone could be tying their self-worth into their body and their image on social media, and then something happens where they get embarrassed on social media or something, and then they want to go jump off a bridge.
Mm.
Like you have to make sure you're healthy in every sense of the word, physically, with your body, with your blood work, with your regular health with a doctor. And then you got to make sure you're mentally, emotionally healthy, and you can't brush that stuff under the rug, whether it's physical or whether it's mental, emotional. You can't brush things under the rug. You got to do what you got to do for your own health. You got to be go to the doctor, check up with your doctor, visits, and make sure you're healthy. If you need to go hire a therapist and get your mental, emotional health going, you need to do that. But
Mhm.
don't brush it under the rug until it explodes. Whatever
Yeah.
your issue is, don't bury your head in the sand about your issues. And then maybe, are you around people that will call you out when you're not
Mm.
keeping yourself in check, whether that's with your body, with your health? Are you being overly competitive to the point of risking your health? And are you being honest with yourself about being unhealthy and not keeping yourself in check?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Accountability, having a good inner circle that's going to keep you accountable. Yeah, that's huge. I think I talked with you about everything. I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on this quote. Whatever you fall in love with is what is going to save your life because it will require you to be the best version of yourself every day. What are your thoughts?
Amen.
Well, you said
Yep.
it. That was your words. You said it. So I
Oh,
hopefully
what
you
that?
agreed with it. Yeah.
That's a good quote. I didn't know I said that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's where, like, it makes me think about this quote that we kind of say it in almost like in a teasing way in the jujitsu. Like, it's cheesy, it's corny, but you'll hear jujitsu saved my life, you know?
Mhm.
So we'll say it like it's corny, it's cheesy. But I mean, anything you fall in love with that is healthy, yeah, like that brings the best out of you.
Yeah.
That gives you a reason to not be lazy. It gives you a reason to be ambitious and be more than what you would have been without it. It gives you a goal. You need to voluntarily accept a load to carry.
Yeah.
You need to chase something that takes real effort out of you. And that's only going to come out of you if, like, you're really passionate about it. So, like, someone who hasn't found something that they're really passionate about, that's going to be a lost person.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, Viktor Frankl would agree with you. A person without purpose, right, is gonna be lost, so,
Yeah, you
yeah.
need purpose, and then just whatever your purpose is, it's wherever your passion is. Like, I can't remember the exact quote, but Jordan Peterson, he talked about, like, pay attention to those things that you fall in love with, because that's a potential you in the future. You know,
Mm.
that's a potential you in the future calling out to you. Pay
Yeah.
attention to those that light a fire under you, and, like, there's a reason you love that. There's a reason when I was a kid, I was drawn to those aggressive masculine things. I always loved watching the Arnold movies, and now I'm competing on his stage in a couple weeks from now.
Mm.
you know, there's a reason I've been drawn to all of this stuff, and now I'm getting to coach people through jujitsu.
Yeah, absolutely, man, and so, Tyler, I feel like this is a great space to end. I was honored to have you on, and this has been a very insightful interview. I think there's been a ton of takeaways from it in terms of resiliency, how to maintain it, how not to get stuck in things that oppose it. And so, yeah, I really appreciate having you on, man. This has been a fun conversation.
Yeah, good to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Patina'd Podcast. There are other shows that emphasize resilience, but my intent is to normalize personal development through embracing challenge by interviewing the common man and woman, the person that you and I can relate to. If you are someone who wants to soak up the insights of normal people doing extraordinary things, please subscribe. If you know somebody who is overwhelmed by fear and complacency, please share this podcast with them. I'm your host, Kenny Hill, and I run a private practice near Sacramento, California called Recovery Hill. My website is in the description tab along with my social media links. The intro music was Two in the Back, performed by Sunday at Slim's on Blue Dot Sessions.